exciting edition of BTA Politics coming to you live on Business Television Africa. My name is Winston, Tackie. Today we're going to delve into the political economic issues of Ghana, and that has to do with very erupting issues as to how the city and how the VAT and also the taxation systems in the country are operating. We'll touch on very sensitive issues today on the show, so make sure you don't miss it. Just stay tuned. You can also get us online on www.businesstvrafrica.com. Just get interactive with us by sending your thought to the WhatsApp line 0206 583 547. 0206-583-547. Today we are not going to get much into politics. We're going to be technocratic in terms of our analysis. So today we brought to you experts who is good in the field of financial analysis, so touching on very prominent issues. Welcome back from that mini documentary. At the moment, I'm sure you're aware of the topics we'll be discussing today on BTA Politics. We're touching on, first of all, the case of Guta, where government has been demanded to come and explain the case that has to do with the flat rate scheme that has been implemented in terms of how taxation in the country is being implied on businesses in the country. So the Ghana Union of Traders Association have calling for clarity on that aspect. But we are going to delve into some technicalities of this whole issue of the taxation in Ghana, how prudent has the government and also Ghana Revenue Authority has been able to ensure that prudent taxation is carried on, whether there's broad stakeholder consultation and also bringing the industry players and businesses to ensure efficient collection of tax. Today, to help me discuss the issues on the BTA Politics is Mr. Isaac Adongo. He's a financial expert in his person and is here with me on the show. Mr. Isaac, how are you, sir?
I'm okay. How are you too?
I'm doing great, sir. How's your day been?
It's been okay.
We go straight to the issues at the moment. Looking at the taxation regime in the country over the years, how will you assess, have we done enough in terms of revenue collection and also how efficient it has been across board?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the major tools that the government has in mobilizing domestic resources to support development is taxation, and particularly looking at the taxes on goods and services, in which case we're looking at the value-added tax. What the value-added tax does is to provide an opportunity for everybody to contribute to the tax basket. And so once you buy a vatable product, what you're simply doing is that you are making a contribution to the national kitty. And you know, several years ago, we were operating the sales tax, and the sales tax was very difficult to implement because with the sales tax, you didn't have this level of broadness, the level at which VAT is able to operate. And so we needed to migrate from the sales tax, which across the globe had been abolished because people realized that there were weaknesses to do with using the sales tax as a means of revenue mobilization, and to passing the value-added tax. I do recall that in the 90s, when the value-added tax was being introduced in Ghana, a lot of people resisted it. I remember there was actually a demonstration called the Kumi Preko. And Kumi Preko was basically meant to ensure that the value-added tax did not come to fruition. Yes, it was shelved because at the time government knew that there had to be some level of consultation and some level of education of the masses in order to ensure that the implementation was smooth. Eventually, it got implemented, and today we are seeing that because of the value-added tax, several other funding vehicles have been developed to be able to accelerate the pace of economic development in Ghana. The value-added tax is the reason today we have the GET Fund, and the GET Fund is doing a tremendous job across the country in building educational infrastructure. It is because of the value-added tax today we have the National Health Insurance Scheme, and we know the National Health Insurance Scheme provides an opportunity for financing healthcare, particularly targeting the poor and the vulnerable, who otherwise will have to pay out of their pocket to be able to access healthcare at the point of need. And so you see that the value-added tax has done quite a great job. Because of the value-added tax, today we have what we call the Ghana Infrastructure and Investment Fund, a vehicle that is supposed to leverage international and domestic resources to accelerate the pace of infrastructure development. And so we do see that the value-added tax is one of the most important revenue generation tools that Ghana piloted and Ghana is still implementing. And so anything to do with smooth implementation of value-added tax is of concern to every government. And I do believe that the current government, being an offshoot of the NDC1 that introduced the value-added tax basically would insist that the right things are done to ensure that we continue to get the benefits and the fruits that the value-added tax has brought to the development of this country.
With initial rejection, that is, we made mention of demonstration before it came into implementation, compared to then, it was because of lack of understanding of the system. Could that be the case? Because if something is new, someone will say change is not easy to implement. By initial processes, you see rejection, opposition against change. But you, just like you made mention of the positivity of this whole value-added tax, now in our current dispensation, issues have to do with whether there's inclusiveness in the tax collection. What are the approaches that have been dealt with?
Yes, I think there are other tax systems, okay? Direct taxes, for instance, where you are taxed on your income, which also includes payment of taxes by corporate entities on their profits. It also includes payments of the returns to investment, such as your dividend that is taxed and things like that. Those ones, we have a challenge broadly of expanding the tax base to include everybody. There are a lot of people in the informal sector who are not paying taxes on their income, and yet they contribute significantly to the productive sector of Ghana. And you would wish that if there was a mechanism that allowed us to expand that base and be able to tap into this resource that people are not contributing and give an opportunity to everybody to make a contribution, we would have a bigger national kitty. And so yes, there's the challenge of trying to expand the tax base, particularly to do with taxes on income. The advantage with that of value-added tax is that almost everybody buys one thing or the other. And therefore, once you buy a product on which a VAT is imposed, you are invariably paying a tax. Now, the other bit of it is that value-added tax is an incremental tax. What that means is that anytime I buy a raw material and I pay a tax on it, okay, the one who collected that tax accounts to government for the collection of that tax. That person is seen as a tax collection agent. Then when I also add value to that product, I also charge a further VAT on it. Now, that further VAT I charge, because the value that I've added, the product is now worth more than I bought it. The balance, the difference between what I paid earlier and what I'm now charging is the additional tax that is being collected on my portion of productivity. So you see that when I then buy my tax, which is my input VAT, I pay my VAT on that. When I produce and I sell it, government says, oh, you've already paid for the VAT which somebody else collected. So we'll give that money back to you by allowing you to deduct it from what you have collected. So if you paid, say, 10,000, and after adding value, you charge another VAT on it, okay, and it is now, let's say, 12,000. You take your 10,000, you give back 2,000. So government has already collected 10,000 through another tax agent, collection agent. You, the one who has also now done some processing and added value, has also added something and you've collected another 2,000. So government cumulatively gets what? 12,000, which is the final figure that you charge to the consumer. And so at every stage, when we are adding productive capacity, productive additions to the product or service, we are invariably adding to the stock of payment that government gets. Now the challenge then was, if I was operating, and if I'm still operating a small business at the corner, and somebody buys a product from me, does he have an opportunity to pay VAT? It means no. It means that only the VAT up to the point of me selling. So my additional value, which is me now bringing it closer to you for convenience and adding a margin for that service, you are not paying anything on that because that person is not registered as a tax collection agent. He's not registered to collect VAT. Okay. So you notice that the small scale sector where Guta... That is where I want to where Guta is.
Before we come to Guta and their complaint at the moment, I'd like you to assess and get the viewers and understand certain aspects of the taxation system. So in supporting small and medium scale enterprises, some would say infant industries who come up and have bigger visions, the role of government to encourage them, some of the demands they always call for is reduction in taxes that will favor them in order to make them competitive. Has the structure at the moment, does it favor the cause of industry, infant industries?
Yes, you see, the challenge of taxation and revenue mobilization in general is dictated by the needs of the economy at a point in time. in Ghana today, we keep realizing that there were some imbalances in our economy, some imbalances to do with our fiscal regime. And when I say imbalances to do with our fiscal regime, what I'm simply saying is that we are spending more than we are collecting, okay? And therefore, there's always a deficit in our budget. And that budget deficit has to be addressed one way or the other. One of the ways we have done it has been to borrow. And when you borrow, there's an additional cost you bring to bear on the citizenry, which is the fact that there will be some interest costs. And that interest cost will have to be borne by us, one way or the other, going into the future. The other way is to appeal to donor partners and your friends to provide you with some support, which we call the donor support. Over the years, Ghana used to get a lot of generous support to our budget. Under the multi-donor funding arrangement, Ghana was getting in the region of about 40% of our budget funded by donors. Okay, so we simply needed to raise 60%. And out of that 60%, we probably were raising about, say, 55% and financing the others even by still borrowing. We were still not able, even under getting 40% free money, to raise the 60% domestically without borrowing. We still had to borrow. Okay, so that funding source, as we speak today, has dried up. Why? Because Ghana has attained a status of a lower middle income country. And these donors are thinking about supporting poorer and smaller countries to come up. So when you are now joining the big players, why should they give money to you when there are smaller companies that are struggling? So those smaller countries must now be the focus of the world's attention towards providing equity and generating the capacity of those countries to support themselves. So Ghana, having become a lower middle income country, is now seen as a bigger country that can support itself. So donors are no more bringing in the money. And last year, we had just about 6% of our budget supported by donors. So if you're moving from 40% donor support to 6% donor support, and we also know that our infrastructure deficit keeps expanding, okay? The World Bank estimates that Ghana needs to invest no less than $10 billion in the next 5 years in order to catch up. Even that, these are just critical sectors of the Ghanaian economy. But
does that explain the reason why the government continuously borrows from the debt market internationally to finance most?
Because Ghana no longer has access, first, to donor funds, and then second, to concessionary facilities. Concessionary facilities are provided by the multilateral organizations, the World Bank, the IMF, you know, and those similar institutions would give you facilities at ridiculously lower rates, less than 1% interest, okay? You have a moratorium of some 20 years to pay, and when the payment starts, it may take another 35 years for you to pay. Having become a lower middle income country, you lose the capacity to access these cheaper sources of funding. So once you are losing your donor support in terms of donor funding of about 40%, even what you are borrowing now, you cannot get the concessionary facilities. You must now go onto the capital market, and capital markets are expensive. Are you getting the point? So government is now compelled to go to the capital markets to access funding that was originally either available for free or on concessionary basis. So what do we do as a country? Do we encourage government to continue to go on the capital market and borrow expensively to finance development, or do we tighten the belt and contribute more to be able to reduce the rate at which government will fund from the expensive capital market? And that is the discussion that we need to have as a country. Once we begin to politicize everything, then government in an election year, if you don't have a bold government, a government that is willing to bite the bullet, what the government will say is that, look, why do I get everybody complaining, you know, just to tax people, get enough revenue to balance the budget or to rebase the economy and get the economy on a sound footing in order that we reduce our level of borrowing, only for them to turn around and get angry at me and vote me out. Okay, if they vote me out, will I be there to manage the economy? So you may decide to go the easiest way. And the easiest way is to make things easier. Reduce taxes, scrap VAT and all of that, get people excited, but in the end you leave a deeper and bigger hole in the finances of Ghana. And when you now win power, we go through another cycle of trying to address that problem again, when we could have dealt with that problem by being a government that has the political will. And so when you see a government willing to take the difficult decisions, even in an election year, it tells you that that government has the people at heart. It tells you that that government
appears that the election year plan that the government intends to adhere to in order to control financing or let's say over expenditure has not really been made available to the ordinary Ghanaian to understand. All we keep hearing is a case of IMF conditionalities and prudent economic management, and also applying to fiscal discipline by the most of the extended credit facility being given by the IMF. Those are the only things that are policies that are controlling the government expenditure. And one thing that the finance minister continuously hits on is zero financing by the central bank. Will all this approach being given by the finance ministry and also the government in a way streamline expenditure and also over reliance on our internally generated revenue?
Yes, I think the issue about external conditionalities are overflowed. And why do I say that? If you know that you are spending and creating a deficit in the region of about 12% to your GDP, and don't forget that your deficit determines the rate of accumulation of debt. Because once you have a deficit, it means you must borrow to fill it. And when you fill it, your debts go up. Okay, your interest payments go up. So you don't need anybody to tell you that you need to stay within manageable limits of your income and expenditure. So if that is something that you need to do, does it matter whether it is the IMF, is the World Bank, or it is your homegrown policy that is dictating that clear thinking? I think it doesn't really matter. As a country, we have moved from 40% deficit in 2008. Manage it, we scale up again to 12%, I think somewhere in 2012. It came down to something in the region of about 11% in 2013. It came down to 9%, and today we are looking at 6.7% deficit. What does that tell you and I? It means that as a country, we are contributing more to address the imbalance. We are contributing more to ensure that the rate of accumulation of debt is reduced, to ensure that we have a budget and a fiscal regime that is moving towards sustainability. And when a government does that and takes the flak for it, it is the best decision any good government with the political will should do. It doesn't matter who is asking you to do that. And so I believe that we are overstretching the issue of whether or not at this point in time it is prudent for us to run large deficits and go borrowing so that you and I don't pay too much taxes. And in the end, we will now pay those debts, whether we are only postponing the difficulty because we will still pay those debts. But at that time, we will pay those debts with interest costs. And today we're looking at something in the region of 10 billion interest costs in our budget. If you and I were contributing more and reducing that deficit, we probably will not be having that kind of money going into servicing of interest. And yet we still are trying to force government to have a bigger appetite for lowering internally generated resources of income in order to continue to look external. Now, one will say that we need to cut our coat according to our size. It's a very simple statement and one that you would enjoy talking about. But is it the hen that comes first before the egg that comes first before the chicken, or the chicken comes before the egg? As a country, we need to improve our competitiveness in order to accelerate growth of development. So, do we continue to have less ambitious infrastructure expansion that will create an enabling environment for us to have schools and train more children to become viable contributors to our national development? Do we spend more to expand the road infrastructure in order to ensure that the country is open up to accelerate the pace of development? Do we spend more to expand our energy base so that we have energy to propel the growth of the industrial sector and our domestic environment? Do we do all of this, or do we wait and allow the road from Accra to, say, Adenta to still be the single lane that it was, that you and I were spending 5 hours to commute from Adenta to your workplace? And obviously, it meant that you had to wake up at 1 a.m. to go to work if you want to meet your normal time of 8 a.m. Okay, so the issue is, as a country, if we assess our infrastructure deficit and what is required to move us to the next level of development, then we must spend on infrastructure development in order to improve our competitiveness as a country. So that is one.
Our internal generated fund enough to help us sustain our debt case at the moment, because looking at the options that has been provided by the Ghana Revenue Authority, they always call for inclusive taxation of the informal sector, because the formal sector at the moment are enduring the pressure that has to do with generating funds to support government infrastructure, just like you made mention of.
There has been a very tremendous improvement in local resource mobilization, and that is the reason why there's a lot of complaint. There has been a strong will to look within, to plug the gap of 34% of donor funds that we no longer can have. There has been a tremendous effort to plug the gap of the concessionary loans that we no longer can have. And that is why, if you look at the total tax revenue in 2008, even under 40% donor support to our budget, we're doing something in the region of 2 billion. Today, our internally generated resources are giving us in the region of close to almost 28 billion. Doesn't that tell you that as a country, we've moved very far? That is the reason you see the massive infrastructure and development that is going on. That is the reason you are finding hospitals and clinics and chip compounds emerge in the remotest corners of Ghana. That is the reason today you can fund the Ghana Education Fund. That is the reason today you can have resources to make sure that the Ghana Infrastructure Fund takes off and takes off smoothly. And so there has been a lot of work to improve revenue generation. If you look at last year,
so if there has been a lot of work in improving revenue generation, the question most Ghanaians want to know is that, yes, you have the money, you've taken my money for the case of backing on project. But one thing I want to know, I want to see the project, I want to feel it, but I don't see the economic impact of certain projects that the government impact on. Some have also questioned the cost evaluation of certain projects, that they have been inflated. So that questionable tag that's been placed on how revenue is being used is something the government has to do. What is your take on that?
I think it's a very genuine conversation that we must have. And it's a very genuine engagement that we must have with the people. And that is why I am very happy that the government is going around accounting to the people. It's going around showing, you see, you sit in Accra and you say, I can't see the project. I drive on the Eastern Corridor Road, okay, and I see a lot of work happening. How do you sit in Accra and want to see the Eastern Corridor Road? The government, the president says, let me go there and show the people what I have done. And you get to a place like Nkwanta, and you see the Eastern Corridor Road, all the way through Pasa, all the way to Otidomanku, into Yendi, into Bimbila. That is how you see the volume of work that has been done with your resources. But you don't sit in Accra and say, I'm not seeing it. You won't see it because it is not located here. I pass through the same road, and I see a new secondary school, community secondary school, that is up and completed. A massive infrastructure project. I walk next door and I see another old secondary school where two dining halls have been provided. Extra school blocks have been built in the same community, where they used not to have it. Some 2008, when you're talking in terms of 2008, and some years back. And so for those people, when you go there and you say that government has not done nothing, they laugh at you because you have no message there. And that is how you see infrastructure. You just walk just behind you, and you used to see how the Rich Hospital was. And you see a magnificent structure coming up. Somebody sits in Zoko, for instance, or in Balungu and says, government is doing that, because he's not been here to see that structure. It takes the government to go there and say, I want to showcase what I have done with your resources. Are you getting the point I'm making? You move around the country, and there's a lot of infrastructure development that is going on. That is how the resources have been used. Initially, the argument was that nothing was being done. Okay? That was the argument. Nothing has been done. Nothing has been done. Immediately you start showing what has been done, then the goalpost shifts. Okay, you have done it, but it's expensive. Okay? So what is the honesty? What is the sincerity? You pass through circle where we used to struggle and try to find corners to escape. Exactly. So all I'm saying is that there is a lot that is being done in the area of infrastructure. And that improvement in the area of infrastructure is very key to making sure that we remain competitive, we have invested in our future. Okay, these are expenditures that will be there and will help us and support us for years.
I think we've laid ample foundation on the taxation and the regimes and what needs to be said or like to be understood in terms of how best we could generate enough revenue to finance certain infrastructure development in the country. Now to the very trending issue that has to do with the Ghana Union of Traders Association are calling for a prudent explanation and also clarity on the 3% taxes that the government will be taxing on their annual revenue. They said under the VAT flat rate scheme, the retailers with annual turnovers between the amount of 100 million Ghana cedis and 1.2 billion Ghana cedis were expected to pay 3% of their turnovers as value-added tax. The 3% flat rate, which became 17.5%, were also inconsistent with certain projections being made by government, and so the industry players are calling for government to come and clarify that particular statement. One also made mention of the case where the executive members of the association complained about the recommendation not being included. They not being included in the recommendation as to when the tax will be operational. So with this issue, okay, before then, what is a flat rate and what do you believe is the best approach in ensuring that businesses are included prudently in the taxation?
We had two levels of tax agents. One was to do with those who were paying, until recently, the 15% tax, or the 15.5 before it increased to 17.5. And there were those who government thought, because of the lower threshold of their sales, had to pay a flat amount of money. I mean, had to charge a flat VAT on the goods that they sell. It is not their profit that they are earning that somebody is charging a flat rate on it. No. It is the same product that you would have bought at a VAT rate of, say, 15.5% at a mall. That those that come under this smaller bracket whose sales threshold was lower were charging 3%. Okay, so it simply meant that, in fact, those people were even becoming more competitive because for the final consumer, he's paying 17% on the same product with, say, ShopRite. But I'm paying 3% if I buy it from somebody with a flat VAT rate of 3%. You see an imbalance there. Are you getting the point? Yeah. So when in 2015 the budget proposals were presented to Parliament, a revision was made for Parliament to pass a law abolishing the 3% VAT rate and putting everybody on a 17.5% rate. That is just the bottom line. It is not as if something is now happening now. No. It is a revision to bring everybody at par in terms of how much you charge on the same goods and services, whether I am buying it from a small-scale seller or I am buying it from the, from the shopping mall or a bigger organization. You are only a means of collecting that money for government. Are you getting the point I'm making? You are only a means of collecting that money for government. And government says, instead of charging 3%, I want everybody to charge 17.5%. So that we are cross-board. And that law was passed, I think, late last year to take effect from January this year. So from January this year, the flat rate system had been abolished. And everybody was now issued with VAT booklets that required them to charge and issue VAT at 17.5%. I hope you're getting the point. So that is where we are. So government has not made a commitment to say that we are charging 3% and then suddenly people are charging. January, you charge 17.5%. February, you charge 17.5%. All the way up to the end of May. Why in June we are now speaking as if there's a new tax regime? Why? Why is it that suddenly, so if after charging the 17.5%, you have a challenge and you feel that you would wish that we go back to the old regime in order to ensure that something is done, Because then it means that you are now competing at the same level with everybody.
So does that mean that there could be some kind of misinformation between the GRA and the Guta itself?
People. No, Guta is misinforming.
Guta is rather misinforming
exactly,
people.
Because it is not as if they were charging 3% this year. This year, we started at the same level of 17.5%. And it's a law passed by Parliament. Government cannot change that law unless it goes back to Parliament for an amendment. And that has not happened. But I do believe that Guta, now realizing that they are charging at the same rate, the level of competition is now keener. Okay, so I would have bought a good from Guta members at 3% VAT. And as a final consumer, I would prefer to go and buy it there instead of buying it at somewhere where I'm charged 17.5%. Now that it is 17.5%, will I beat the bush from Adenta all the way to Makwala to go and buy the same good that I was paying less tax? Are you getting the point? So Guta can come up and say, it is affecting our volumes. It is affecting our business because we are no longer generating the same volume of business that we're generating when we had a comparative advantage in terms of the taxes that we're collecting. Okay,
let me take your thoughts on this particular statement being made by the Guta members, Benjamin Yubo. I said that if you sit down with someone to come out with something, that will be easier for those who are the main players. Then the next time you decide to go otherwise without consulting the various stakeholders during implementation, you are going to have problems, and that is the problems we are facing now. That Mr. Yebo have observed. However, urged authorities and the commissioner at GRA to do what to communicate with his staff and solve the issue immediately. It has to do with the case of miscommunication in that aspect.
All I'm saying is that there are processes that go into the appropriations bill and the revenue acts that are passed and amended during the budget process. That process include constructive engagement with stakeholders to seek their views and to seek their inputs. It is possible that in those engagements leading to the 2016 budget being prepared and submitted to Parliament, Guta must have raised a concern that they want the 3% to be retained. That is a recommendation. But if in the end of that engagement, government decides not to implement their proposal and implement a proposal under the various scenarios of raising revenue and the rest to stick with equalizing at 17.5%, you will definitely see a law being passed that may not reflect the totality of what you expected. Okay. And that is because you are not the only stakeholder in this. There are several other stakeholders. Each stakeholder has its own different positions. But at the end of the day, all these positions must be reconciled with a common position. That common position may not necessarily favor everybody who is a stakeholder. And so I do agree that having had engagement and having put your case across, if you see that in the end the implementation of the policy is different from what you engage in, you may have concerns. And those are legitimate concerns. So what you do is to go back and engage them and say, look, we made these proposals. We were mindful of the fact that the effect of implementing what we are doing now will be what we are seeing. And because of that, we want to engage you in order to see whether something can be done about it. What that then means is that if it is agreed and a commitment is reached, government will go back to the people that gave it the authority to tax the 17.5% and say, we think that we want to vary our original proposal, which you approved. We have seen that there are some effects, and some of our stakeholders have come to us. And so we want you to bring the rate to another 3%, or a flat rate of 5%, or a flat rate of 7%. It cannot be 3% because now the additional 2% that is meant to finance the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund must be taken care of. And so there is a possibility to then arrive at a conclusion that allows a win-win situation for both parties. If that engagement has not yet been finalized, it does not mean that you are not giving a listening ear. It means that you must engage more. And I read yesterday that the Minister of Finance came out to say that they did not agree to go with a flat rate of 3%. And that what they agreed is what they presented to Parliament, which Parliament approved. But I think that it is still possible to engage the stakeholders and come to a conclusion if there is a genuine need to vary what was originally presented. So that a new bill could be presented to Parliament, or a new proposal could be given to Parliament to vary this giving exemption to that of the Guta members. In that case, I don't expect to see a 3% when we have had an adjustment of about 2%. And so it may be a figure upward of 3%, okay, or that they may not arrive at a conclusion where government is willing to vary. But I do believe that if there's a strong case, why not? Government should be able to listen and see what's going on. So nobody should be creating the impression that suddenly a new tax has emerged in June, okay, to create the impression that all of a sudden in June, there's a new tax. Okay. Parliament passed that law all the way back late 2015, and its implementation as part of the implementation of the broader budget for 2016. Because in the budget, you don't only approve my expenditure, you must also approve my source of revenue. And that is one of the source of revenue that was approved in this budget. And that is what is being implemented. And so I think that, yes, there's room for dialogue, there's room for constructive engagement, but we should not create the impression that something has gone fundamentally wrong with a new tax that has just emerged. That is the point I want to make.
You've been watching BTA Politics live on Business Television Africa, BTA. I'm sure I'm having my guest for today, Mr. Isaac Adongo. He's a financial expert, and as we've been watching, we give you in-depth analysis of taxation in Ghana and the systems and processes involved, and the revenue generation abilities and implementation of certain policies by the Ghana Revenue Authority, and going forward, how prudent the government has been engaging in borrowing, the reasons behind it, whether it's logically and financially necessary in terms of how best we can finance certain projects. I believe all those thoughts have been satisfied right here on BTA. Right about now, we move to a very pressing issue. But before then, let me remind you, the program is brought to you by Group Indum and GM Foundation. We are streaming online on www.businesstvrafrica.com, where we give exclusive political economic issues across the country. Right about now, we still move on to more pressing issues, and my guest today is Mr. Isaac Adongo. He's a financial expert, and we've been delving in issues that has to do with prudent from different perspectives that has devoid of political outlook. So, in as much as you watch, you can still send your thoughts and comments from a prudently non-political perspective, even though it's BTA Politics. Make sure that your comments are prudent and objective, which is 0206 583 547. Now we move to very pressing issues in the field of business and economy that has to do with the Ghana cedi. Last year, the cedi was facing a lot of challenges. We saw it falling in the first quarter to the amount of 33%. That is depreciating in value, and that caused a lot of businesses and also cases of businesses shutting down. We saw a lot of layoff by businesses in the country amidst the challenging deficit that we had in the country. But in 2016, we saw a bit of stability in the cedi. We saw a bit of energy stability, but the complaint was in the taxation aspect of the country, where we saw taxing of the petroleum levy and also the water, and a lot of utility taxes came into light. This has also affected businesses. But now we still delve on the cedi. In the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, cedi, even though it is stable and in the first quarter, it's still facing a lot of challenges because according to research being done by the ECOWAC research, it came out to say that definitely the cedi is performing okay, but in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, it is the 7th worst performing currency. That is the information right now. So we're going to get into it and get the technical aspect of what are the leading factors that has caused our cedi to be worst performing amongst the trading currencies in some African countries. And let's see what we can get out of it. So going forward, the cedi last year was facing a lot of sickness. It got cured, it got healed, but amidst comparatively with African currencies, it appears to be the 7th worst. What are some of the things that we fail to analyze or to inculcate in ensuring that the stability and volatility of the cedi is adhered to, and also certain policies that will streamline our FX market?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the cedi basically didn't perform very well last year. There was so much pressure on the cedi, and we do recall that at some point, some speculation here and there, the central bank had to adopt very tight monetary policy stand in order to support the cedi. Several of the vulnerabilities are beginning to even emerge. Our external trade position was not good, and the reason was essentially the falling commodity prices. Don't forget that the 2015 budget, even before it took off, began to experience challenges. We remember that the minister had to go straight back to Parliament to present a policy paper because we're already losing $700 million on our projected revenue from the oil. And that was purely on account of the fact that the oil price, that was somewhere around $100 per barrel all the way in 2014 was now tumbling to less than $40 a barrel. And so these external vulnerabilities impacted. We are aware that the mining sector saw a very bigger hit in terms of export revenue to Ghana. And we are aware that we lost about 14% of the revenue in terms of even the previous year. We are not looking at projections, but in terms of the previous year comparatively, we lost about 14%. Most mining companies suffered on account of declining gold prices, and as a result, their output has to also drop because they were not willing to incur so much cost in order to export and earn very little. And so we saw a drastic drop in our revenues from the mining sector. We are also aware that cocoa prices also dropped significantly on the world market over the period. And so cumulatively, a fall in the commodity prices across the globe had a toll on our inflows that would have supported the city. So that was a major challenge to do with the city. The other challenge that brought the city under pressure was also inflationary trends. And we know that inflation also responds almost invariably to what people will call imported inflation. Once your city is depreciating, what you get is that goods that come in become expensive, and that inflation leads to further speculation and all of that. In fact, speculative buying of even the dollar as a store of value, became one of the main areas of leakages of our total forex liquidity in the country. And so these were the clear challenges. Amidst the fact that government was now beginning to tighten the fiscal stance that it had. And that is why you see that at the end of the year, even though government had budgeted to achieve a 7.3% deficit, it actually outperformed that projection by doing 6.7%. It tells you that there was a lot of commitment to ensure that we got our fiscal imbalances right. And that had an impact on the city. But the benefits of all of that would begin to show in the next year. And you notice in this year, the first quarter of this year, compared to the first quarter of last year. Last year, the first quarter, the city depreciated by some 17.2%. In the first half of the first quarter of this year, the city has depreciated by less than 1%. In fact, 0.4% depreciation of the city. It tells you that the city is beginning to gain a lot of strength. And I do recall that even the Moody's, in their current rating, do admit that government accelerated the pace of fiscal consolidation. They admit that government's own effort at making sure that the city is arrested, took a different dimension through tighter monetary stance. And so I do believe that with the city now beginning to stabilize, and on account of what we are seeing this year, cocoa prices are beginning to rebound. Most commodity prices are beginning to go up. Gold prices are going up. We now know that oil prices are beginning to go up. And so with a favorable environment, a favorable pricing of our commodities that generate the inflows, we are now beginning to see some support that the city will get because of positive inflows of dollars into the country. But on account of that also, the Bank of Ghana has shown a lot of creativity, innovation, and a lot of foresight, I would say.
How has the Bank of Ghana done that?
Because the Bank of Ghana is beginning to do things that will provide a better forex regime. Bank of Ghana is now saying that we want to have the liquidity in the banks. So there is an abolition with a recent directive of the central bank that the central bank now has abolished the surrendering of forex that used to be given to them by the mining companies to the banks. So everybody knows the amount of forex within the system, and that gives you some level of predictability and certainty. So it improves the liquidity of forex within the banking arena. So that is one major step that the central bank has taken. The central bank has also taken a step to improve the competitiveness of our export players by realigning the demand for them to repatriate their profit into Ghana within 2 months. What that meant was that if you were competing with other countries in the export of your products, and you didn't have enough resources to back your working capital, you would demand payment terms of 2 months and nothing more. Because within 2 months, the money must come. Somebody is willing to give a credit period of, say, 3 months. So who will be competitive? So our export operators were compelled to repatriate profits within 2 months. Now that has been abolished, and you're saying repatriate your profit in line with your terms of payment with your client. So if I'm exporting to you and we have agreed that you pay me in 3 months, by all means repatriate the money, immediately you get it. So that gives another level of competitiveness and ease of flows of income into the country. The third one is that now all profits must be, all export revenues must be repatriated to Ghana. Now, when they are repatriated, those that used to be held abroad, we did not have access to those in order to improve liquidity in the forex market. So with a much liquid forex market, with less interference of the central bank, we are likely to see proper relativities in terms of pricing of forex on the market. And that should further strengthen the cedi going forward. The third one is that if by June, the cedi is still performing as good as it is performing, and we know that one of the most serious supportive mechanisms of the cedi is normally the syndicated funds for cocoa board. And cocoa board is going in for some $2 billion. And don't forget that most of cocoa board's expenditure are in cedis because they buy the cocoa in cedis. So that will further support the forex market. So with all of these put together, the cedi should see further strengthening going forward. And once the cedi begins to see further strengthening, the downward trajectory that we are seeing in respect of inflation will be accelerated. And that is why it is very clear by the middle of next year, Ghana should be achieving, we should be returning to single-digit inflation.
So looking at the case of the forex being open to the demands of the market, just like the central bank has initiated, wouldn't that create a case of lack of monitoring in instances? Because monitoring will become an issue for central bank, looking at their own stance initially.
Central bank has a very strong regulatory regime, particularly to do with the banks. Our banks are seriously regulated and monitored. How many banks do we have? And so if you are surrendering your revenue to the central bank, okay, which has been regulated over the years, and in fact, the banks are the first line of businesses in Ghana to have introduced risk management as a core function within their operations. And it is all on account of a call by the central bank to ensure stricter risk management of the resources that are available to the banks. And so the banks are the best place to have safer, regulated, and risk-managed resources lodged. And so if the banks are now being given the opportunity to have more resources that would have been held by the central bank, in order to leverage that to improve on liquidity, to be able to leverage that to issue letters of credit, to be able to leverage that to negotiate rates with people who are holding forex with them, it will further improve the transparency within the market. It will further improve proper realignment of the fundamentals that underpin the prices and the forex that we are paying. And so at the end of the day, you should see further stability. And I'm happy and said it is more proactive because it is better to introduce far-reaching stability measures when you are already in a safer mood. Because immediately things begin to go away where you start to introduce some of them, there will be resistance. You saw the resistance that the central bank faced when it began to introduce a raft of policies somewhere last year or two.
That has included 20 million that was
all those, apart from even the 20 million that was pumped, we had this issue about you not being able to keep a forex account, you know,
how much you can
and you cannot spend in dollars and all of that, was meant to stem the tide. In a regime where there's less speculation, the cedi is doing better, and people don't have the appetite to hold the dollar because they will lose value, it is easier to introduce some of these policies. And that is why I say that is more proactive in putting them together so that the cedi gains further and further strength. And the resistance will disappear, speculation will disappear, and we can now have better relativities in terms of market forces determining forex rates. And so I am saying that by the end of the year, the cedi will not only see stability, but will see a further strengthening because of all these factors that I've mentioned. Okay. Because of the fact that our inflows are improving, because of the fact that a further $2 billion will come in from the syndication of the cocoa board funds, and we also know that because of the raft of measures that have been put in together by the central bank to improve the liquidity within the banking system and generate further transparency will strengthen the cedi moving into the year.
Interestingly, there's assessment being made by Moody's recently that has to do with the credit profile of Ghana. Say Ghana's credit profile is also exposed to lower for longer commodity prices, which weigh on the balance of payments and fiscal revenues. Also, that is assessment being made by Moody, and it rated it as very low, reflecting the country's high debt burden and the very low debt affordability resulting from high interest expenditure as a share of GDP and revenue. Now, this has to, in relation to the FX, some will say our debt ratio to our FX at the moment can be interlinked.
Yes, I think what Moody is saying is exactly what I have told you here. Moody is saying that we have a lower, for longer, commodity price vulnerability. What does that mean? Prices of our commodities can drop and will take longer period to recover. So you saw cocoa prices dropped, it took a longer period to recover. We saw gold prices dropped, it took a longer period to recover. It took oil prices dropped, it took a longer period to recover. So what Moody is saying is that this is the narrative of the export revenue drivers of Ghana. And so on account of that, they are reluctant, okay, to rely exclusively on the new improvement that we are seeing at this point to arrive at a conclusion. They are not saying that Ghana has suddenly become a different country in terms of your revenue drivers. No. They are just telling us that over the years, this has been our vulnerability. And because we suffered that vulnerability last year, they would want to wait and see how this improvement that we are seeing will take root going forward. And as a result of that, they are reluctant to give us a favorable rating. I don't think that is because of any government in Ghana that is creating this. It is the structure and the narrative of our export drivers. And they are repeating exactly what Ghana is. Okay? And because of that, it is impacting on our revenue. And that is true. And once our revenues are impacted, there is a problem to do with him or Moody not wanting to celebrate the massive achievement of fiscal consolidation. Because if it happens, we may slip back again. So all they are saying is that we are doing very well at the moment, but I want to tread cautiously. I want to tread cautiously because if these things happen again, you may slip. And so yes, you overperformed your fiscal consolidation targets. In fact, if you compare that to 3 years ago, you have halved it now. So you must be praised for that. On account of expected expansion of oil inflows into Ghana, Ghana still has a better, prospect of expanding its export revenue. So these are the issues. And it is this that is generating lower revenue and therefore the threat of possibly having to borrow and then worsen our debt burden. And so that is what they are saying. They are not saying Ghana has suddenly performed worse. No. They are simply saying these are the narratives. We want to wait and see how the narratives will improve so that on account of that, we can say something. But you have had some positives and we have acknowledged that.
Okay. Mr. I'll come back to you shortly on the projections, whether going forward, the inflation figures that have been given. At the moment, the central bank has targeted 10%, but do you think that will be achievable, considering our current state and stability of our city? But we'll come back shortly. You'll be watching BTA Politics. I'm sure you're enjoying the conversation and discussion ongoing at the moment on the state of our city. We've been analyzing very technical economic issues and also assessing it from technocratic perspective. And so today we were talking about the case of the city and going forward, what are the fundamentals that have to be ensured that the stability that the city is having is sustained. We've delved into it, but now we're seeing whether the projection being made by the central bank and targeting inflation will be prudently achieved. So, and my guest at the moment is Mr. Isaac Adongo, is a financial expert. So, Mr. Isaac, you made mention of the fact that the Moody's outlook looks are very good in terms of projection to international communities and investors. That will, in a way, attract more revenue in terms of people who are willing to come into the country to invest hugely. But going forward, interlinking it to the inflation, how will that be sustainable, or how would that be achieved?
Yes, I think I have indicated that all the indicators are showing a downward trajectory for inflation. And it is no wonder that the central bank is very optimistic that its medium-term target of 8% plus or minus 2 would be achieved by the middle of next year. All is because of the fundamentals that we're seeing. In fact, Moody makes it very clear that some of the successes is the fact that there has been an accelerated fiscal consolidation, which impacted on inflation and monetary aggregates. And they're saying that there has been an accelerated, and it shows government commitment to fiscal consolidation. That is a plus. It goes on to say that as a result of the stability, Ghana is bound now to experience massive growth going forward. And that GDP would grow from 3.9% last year to 5.1%. That's a good recovery, and would achieve 6.5% next year. How would somebody say that that is an unfavorable outlook? It tells you that as a country, we are on the right track. And Moody accepts that Ghana is moving on the right track. And so all these are going to impact on inflation, because once productivity is going up, underpinned by some of the risk factors that they have mentioned, and the risk factors are very clear. If we continue to sustain the power situation as it is, that will continue to accelerate growth. If we continue to be lucky to have commodity prices rebound, things will improve further. And if we continue not to have slippages of fiscal situation, and we are disciplined in 2012, and by all indications, you can see that we are disciplined. Because if you look at the deficit figures in the first quarter, government overachieves its deficit projections by almost 3% in the first quarter alone. So that tells you that there's still a commitment for further balancing of the economy. And so putting all that together, all that Moody is saying, because of our debt situation, which has been influenced largely by the shocks and the vulnerability, even though they are seeing improvement in all these factors that should inform a better fiscal space and should inform a better debt profile, they are not willing to celebrate yet. And therefore, they are not willing to give us a positive rating at this point in time, unless those shocks or those risks that they fear is synonymous with the narrative of our economy, do not come back again. And so that should tell you that Ghana is on the path of stability. Ghana is on the path of lower inflationary targets. And don't forget that single-digit inflation has been achieved in Ghana several times by this government. And so for a government that is the only government that has ever achieved single-digit inflation consistently for 3 years, and under the leadership of the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana when he was the central banker, it should tell you that achieving single-digit inflation by the middle of next year and propelling the growth factors would be a major...
Yeah. IMF advised reforms and continued tight policy stance by the Bank of Ghana will, however, help build confidence, but inflation amid weak 2015-2016 cocoa output and higher spending in the run-up to 2016 election are all concerns that the government intends to express in terms of the outlook of Ghana. It also made mention of the fact that the local currency is expected to hover around 3 cedi 87 pesos against the American currency this week. It also linked it to the interest rates in the United States and how favorable it will look for Ghana should it still maintain a bad book in the long run.
Yes, you see, all that Moody is saying, what you have said,
yes.
What that Moody is saying is that there are risks to what we are currently seeing. There are risks to the improvement that we are seeing. And if those risks manifest, we'll have a further problem. One of the risks is that if there's fiscal indiscipline in 2016 being an election year, okay, then we would have eroded the gains of fiscal consolidation. That is a fear. It doesn't mean that they have seen a clear manifestation of fiscal indiscipline. No. They are also saying that if we still continue to have a problem, that is, if cocoa prices begin to show a downward trend again, then there will be another problem. And they are also saying that if the American government begins to raise interest rates, it will mean that America will become a better investment destination of investable funds across the globe. And that would mean that interest rates in other places, including Ghana, where we source our funding, will go up. So these are risk factors. These are not to say that this is what Ghana is doing. They are simply saying, you are doing so well, but these are the risk factors that you must watch. And those risk factors, as per the performance of the first quarter of the year, tells you that government is on top of these risk factors, except those external vulnerabilities that are not controlled by the forces within Ghana. And that is vulnerability in relation to commodity price drops and the tampering of the U.S. Government in terms of raising interest. We have no control in that. But what we can do is to continue to strengthen our fiscal discipline in order to ensure that we do not have slippages in the election year. And I've heard a commitment from the president that he's not going to overspend in 2016. And I want to believe that. Other one is also that the central bank, if it doesn't loosen up its fiscal monetary policy stance, and as we can see from the last few monetary committee meetings, they are not about to do that. And they have said, even though we are making gains, the risks that led to higher inflation spirals are still there. And so they want to tighten further for inflation to continue to the medium-term objective of 8% plus or 2. And so by that, they will now be able to then loosen up and then begin to loosen up their monetary policy. And so Moody is simply telling Ghana, watch these factors. And I do believe that Ghana is already watching. Okay.
So what is your personal outlook in terms of Ghana's going forward in controlling inflation, our currency stability, how business will be sustainable, and also amid our inconsistent supply of energy, even though they were a bit stable, but we're still seeing hitches here and there?
I would say that if you asked me this question earlier last year, okay, one would have said the short, medium to long term, the short term outlook of Ghana was not good, but the medium to long term was bright. Today, I'm happy to say that the short, medium to long term prospects of Ghana are very bright. And Moody has indicated that. To be expecting inflation to end at a single digit by 2017, and they have indicated that. To expect also that GDP would rebound from 3.9 to 5.1 this year and achieve 6.5% next year. And these are short term. But medium term, you are looking at all our gas reserves that we are investing in coming on board. You are looking at expansion of the additional oil fields that are going to come on board. You are looking at the effect of the massive infrastructure that is going on beginning to hit the economy. And you are beginning to see the stability that will lead to further lowering of interest rates going into the future. And so long-term prospects are extra bright. Okay. And so for me, I'm happy today to say that by the performance of this government, we have improved to now have short, medium to long-term prospects of Ghana very bright.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Isaac Adongo has been my guest for today on BTA Politics. I have to say, we are most grateful for your time, for coming to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure. So today, I'm sure most of you have been well groomed in terms of the financial outlook and economic of Ghana, and also that has to do with the city businesses have been well informed. If you, in case, want to have more information, you can kindly send your text to a WhatsApp line on 0206 533-547, and I bet you your thought and comment will be adhered to as soon as possible. This program is brought to you by the kindest courtesy of Group Indum and GM Foundation, produced by Anna Maria Nyame. She's my producer extraordinaire, I have to say, and to my cameraman and crew behind the scene doing an awesome work. I say I'm most grateful to you, and thank you, my viewers, for taking time to watch BTA Politics every day, from 8 o'clock to 10 p.m. You are always tuned. Loyal viewers, I'll have to say, anywhere you are across the world, you can get us online on www.businesstvafrica.com. My name is Winston Tackie. I've been your host for tonight. Till then, have a good day. Bye-bye.